I learned something important the night I ran into that church. Sometimes the safest place in the city is also the last place you expect to find the man everyone fears. Rain hammered the streets of Brooklyn hard enough to blur the traffic lights into red and yellow smears across the pavement. My shoes splashed through puddles as I ran. Cold water soaked through my jeans. My lungs burned. Every breath felt sharp and unfinished. I did not dare look behind me again. I had already done that 3 times in the last block. Every time, I saw the same thing. Shadows. Dark vehicles parked where they should not have been. Men talking into phones. Maybe I was imagining some of it. Maybe I was not. Either way, fear had a way of turning ordinary city sounds into warnings. A car door closing became a threat. Footsteps became pursuit. A stranger glancing in my direction became a reason to run faster. My name is Grace Miller, and 24 hours earlier I had been living a completely normal life. I worked at a small accounting office in downtown Brooklyn. I paid my rent on time. I called my younger sister every morning. I worried about grocery prices and student loans like everyone else. Then I found something I was never supposed to find. And by midnight, I was running through a storm with my heart trying to escape my chest. The church appeared at the end of the block like something from another century. St. Agnes. Old stone walls. Tall stained glass windows. Heavy wooden doors. A narrow steeple reaching into the rain-dark sky. I had walked past it 100 times and never gone inside. That night it felt like the only place left in the world. I climbed the steps 2 at a time and grabbed the brass handle. To my surprise, the door opened. Warm air spilled out. The smell of old wood and candle wax greeted me immediately. I stepped inside and pushed the door closed behind me. Silence wrapped around me so suddenly it felt unreal. Outside, rain continued to pound the city. Inside, everything slowed. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar. Small candles flickered beside statues. Colored light from stained glass windows painted faint patterns across the stone floor. For the first time in hours, I could hear my own breathing. I stood there, dripping rainwater onto the floor, trying to convince myself I was safe. My hands still trembled. My pulse still raced. But nobody followed me through the door. Nobody called my name. Nobody appeared from the shadows. Slowly, I moved toward a pew near the front and sat down. My shoulders sagged with exhaustion. I pressed both hands together and lowered my head. I was not particularly religious. I had not attended church regularly since childhood. Yet in that moment, surrounded by silence and candlelight, I found myself whispering a prayer anyway. Not for money. Not for answers. Just for protection. Just for one place where nobody could find me. The words barely left my lips before a sound echoed softly through the church. The creak of old wood. I froze. Someone else was there. My head lifted slowly. Far in the back, beyond rows of empty pews, a figure sat motionless beneath the shadow of a large wooden cross. A man in a dark suit. Watching quietly. And then he stood. The man rose slowly from the last pew, and somehow that made him more intimidating than if he had rushed toward me. The church was large, but suddenly it felt smaller. Every candle seemed brighter. Every sound seemed sharper. The rain tapping against the stained glass windows faded into the background as my attention locked onto him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that looked far too expensive for a place where people usually came to pray. As he stepped into the dim light, I caught the color of his eyes. Blue-gray. Calm. The kind of eyes that missed nothing. I immediately stood from the pew. Every instinct told me to keep my distance. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag. The small flash drive hidden inside suddenly felt heavier than it should have. The man stopped several rows away, giving me space. That surprised me. Most powerful people moved as if the world belonged to them. This man seemed content to wait. "You look like someone who has had a difficult night," he said. His voice was low and controlled. Not cold. Not warm. Just steady. I did not answer. He glanced toward the church doors. The rain is getting worse. Still, I said nothing. My heart had not slowed since he stood up. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he gave a small nod. Fair enough. Then he sat back down on the edge of a pew as though he had all the time in the world. That confused me more than anything. If he wanted information, why was he not asking questions? If he wanted me gone, why was he not telling me to leave? Minutes passed. The candles flickered softly. Somewhere deeper in the church, an old heating system hummed quietly. I kept expecting him to make another move. He did not. Eventually curiosity overcame fear. Who are you? I asked. His gaze lifted toward me. Adrian Blackwell. The name hit me like a bucket of ice water. I knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name. Business magazines knew it. News stations knew it. People whispered it in restaurants and boardrooms. Adrian Blackwell. Wealthy investor. Influential businessman. The man many believed controlled far more than anyone could prove. Suddenly the church felt 10 degrees colder. My pulse accelerated again. He noticed. Of course he noticed. You recognize the name, he said. It was not a question. Yes. Adrian nodded once. No arrogance. No pride. Just acceptance. And now you are wondering whether you chose the wrong church. I swallowed hard. The fact that he guessed my thoughts so easily did not help. Did I? For the first time, something almost resembling amusement touched his expression. Not a smile. Just the faintest shift. That depends. Before I could ask what he meant, a flash of lightning illuminated the stained glass windows. Colored light spilled briefly across the stone floor. The church seemed frozen between darkness and color. Adrian's eyes remained on me. Who are you running from, Grace? Every muscle in my body tightened. I had never told him my name. Not once. The realization hit me instantly. My breath caught. Adrian saw the reaction and slowly lifted one hand. The receptionist from your accounting office posted your employee photo online 6 months ago. It was not difficult. Somehow that explanation felt almost worse. He knew exactly who I was. I looked toward the doors. Then back toward him. The question hung in the air between us. Who are you running from? For several seconds I considered lying. Then I remembered the vehicles. The phone calls. The reason I was carrying the flash drive at all. Finally, I whispered a single name. And the moment that name left my mouth, Adrian's expression changed. The change lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Adrian Blackwell had been calm from the moment I entered the church. Controlled. Unshaken. The kind of man who looked like nothing surprised him anymore. Then I spoke that name, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The candles flickered softly between us. Rain continued to drum against the stained glass windows. For a moment neither of us spoke. Adrian leaned back slightly against the pew and looked toward the altar as if organizing a thought he had not expected to revisit tonight. That is not a name I hear often inside churches, he said quietly. I swallowed. You know him? Adrian's gaze returned to mine. Unfortunately. The answer sent another wave of unease through me. Everything about the last 24 hours felt like a puzzle missing half its pieces. I knew enough to be scared. Not enough to understand why. I sat down again because my legs suddenly felt weak. The wooden pew creaked beneath me. Across the church, Adrian remained standing. The distance between us felt deliberate. Respectful. Like he understood that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Tell me why you are running, he said. His voice remained calm. I looked down at my hands. They were still trembling slightly. The flash drive hidden inside my bag felt like it was generating its own gravity. Every instinct told me to keep my mouth shut. Yet I was exhausted. Exhausted from running. exhausted from being afraid. Exhausted from carrying something I never asked to find. I work for an accounting firm, I began. Worked. Adrian nodded for me to continue. 3 days ago I was reviewing archived financial files for a client audit. I paused. The memory still felt unreal. I found transactions that did not make sense. The church seemed even quieter now. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I kept looking. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. And what did you find? I took a slow breath. Money moving through companies that barely existed. Payments going in circles. Accounts connected to names that should not have been connected. Adrian did not interrupt. The more I looked, the worse it became. I glanced toward the church doors. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping. I copied the files onto a flash drive. I thought I could take them to the authorities. The words sounded foolish now. Naive. Adrian understood that immediately. Someone realized what you had found. It was not a question. I nodded. The next morning, my office computer was gone. Then people started asking questions. Then vehicles started appearing outside my apartment. My throat tightened. Yesterday someone called my sister pretending to be a bank representative. Adrian's eyes hardened slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. And the flash drive? He asked. My hand instinctively moved toward my bag. I still have it. For the first time since I arrived, Adrian looked genuinely concerned. He exhaled slowly and glanced toward the stained glass windows where rainwater slid down the colored glass in silver streaks. Grace, he said carefully, the reason they are looking for you is not because of what you know. My stomach tightened. Then why? Adrian held my gaze. The church seemed to hold its breath with me. Because of what that flash drive can prove. For a few seconds, I could not speak. The candles continued to burn quietly beside the altar. Rain rolled down the stained glass windows in shimmering lines of silver and blue. Somewhere high above us, thunder rumbled across the city. Yet all I could hear were Adrian's last words. Because of what that flash drive can prove. I looked down at my bag resting beside me on the pew. It suddenly felt less like a storage device and more like a ticking clock. I never wanted any of this, I said quietly. Adrian nodded. I know. I am not an investigator. My voice cracked slightly. I am not a journalist. I am not trying to expose anyone. I know that too. His calmness somehow made everything feel more real. Most people would have tried to reassure me. Adrian simply acknowledged the truth. That was somehow more comforting. He walked slowly toward the front of the church and stopped near a row of candles. The soft light reflected across his face. For the first time, he looked less like the powerful man whose name appeared in newspapers and more like someone carrying memories he rarely discussed. The problem is not what you intended, he said. The problem is what those files represent. I watched him carefully. What do they represent? Adrian folded his hands in front of him. A chain. I frowned. A chain? Money creates influence. Influence creates protection. Protection creates loyalty. Eventually nobody remembers where the first transaction started. His eyes lifted toward the stained glass ceiling. People build entire empires that way. The words settled heavily inside me. I suddenly understood why everyone seemed so desperate to recover the flash drive. It was not about a mistake. It was about proof. Real proof. The kind that connected names, accounts, and decisions that were never supposed to be connected. My stomach tightened. What am I supposed to do? Adrian looked directly at me. First, you stop running alone. Before I could respond, a sound echoed through the church. The heavy front doors shifted slightly. Not opening. Just moving. Both of us turned toward the entrance. My heart immediately accelerated. Adrian remained still. Listening. Watching. Several seconds passed. Then silence returned. The storm continued outside. Nothing else happened. Yet the atmosphere had changed. The church no longer felt isolated from the city. It felt connected to it. Exposed to it. Vulnerable. I realized my hands were shaking again. Adrian noticed immediately. Grace. His voice was steady. Look at me. I did. Has anyone actually spoken to you? I blinked. What? The people following you. Have they approached you directly? I thought back over the last 2 days. The parked vehicles. The strange calls. The men standing outside buildings. The feeling of being watched. Slowly, I shook my head. No. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. Good. Good? It means they are uncertain. I stared at him. About what? For the first time that night, something close to determination appeared in his expression. About where the flash drive is. The realization hit me instantly. Until now, they were guessing. Watching. Searching. But they did not know. Adrian took a slow breath and glanced toward the church doors again. That uncertainty is the only reason you made it here. Thunder rolled once more across the sky. The candles flickered. And then Adrian said something that made my pulse stop for an entirely different reason. Unfortunately, he said quietly, that uncertainty is not going to last much longer. The church clock somewhere above us marked another hour with a deep metallic chime. Each note seemed to settle into the old stone walls before fading away. I sat motionless on the pew, staring at Adrian while the weight of everything pressed against my chest. Outside, the storm continued to sweep across Brooklyn. Inside, the candles burned steadily as if they belonged to a different world entirely. What happens when they stop guessing? I asked quietly. Adrian did not answer immediately. He walked toward one of the stained glass windows and looked out into the rain. Colored reflections moved across his suit as headlights passed outside. Then they start narrowing possibilities, he said. And eventually they arrive at the correct one. My throat tightened. This church. Adrian nodded. The honesty should have frightened me. Instead, it felt strangely reassuring. He never softened reality to make it easier. He simply told the truth. For the first time in 2 days, I knew where I stood. The uncertainty had been worse. Then I should leave, I said. Adrian turned toward me. Why? Because I do not want trouble following me here. A faint expression crossed his face. Not amusement. Something closer to understanding. Grace, trouble arrived long before you did. The answer caught me off guard. I looked around the sanctuary. The worn wooden pews. The flickering candles. The quiet altar. Everything seemed peaceful. Untouched. Adrian followed my gaze. Places like this do not remain sacred because danger never finds them, he said. They remain sacred because people choose what they will protect inside them. The words lingered in the air between us. Before I could respond, a small side door near the altar opened. An elderly priest stepped quietly into the sanctuary carrying a lantern. His silver hair caught the candlelight. He looked from Adrian to me and seemed completely unsurprised by either of our presence. You are still here, he said gently. Adrian inclined his head respectfully. Father Thomas. The priest smiled. I suspected the storm might convince a few souls to stay longer tonight. Then his eyes settled on me. There was no suspicion in them. No curiosity. Only kindness. You look exhausted, my child. I realized I probably looked terrible. Rain-soaked hair. Smudged makeup. Fear written across my face. Father Thomas stepped closer and offered a warm smile. There is fresh coffee in the parish office. For the first time all night, I almost laughed. Coffee seemed absurdly normal compared to everything else happening. Yet somehow that normality felt comforting. A few minutes later, the three of us sat around a small wooden table in a quiet room behind the sanctuary. The smell of coffee mixed with old books and polished wood. The storm sounded farther away here. Father Thomas listened while Adrian explained only the parts that mattered. When he finished, the priest folded his hands and looked at me thoughtfully. You came here because you needed sanctuary? He said. I nodded. Yes. He smiled softly. Then you shall have it. Emotion rose unexpectedly in my chest. I had spent 2 days feeling hunted, isolated, and terrified. Yet this elderly priest had made a decision in less than 10 seconds. Father Thomas stood and placed a small key on the table. There is a guest room upstairs. You can rest there tonight. Then he looked toward Adrian. And I suspect you already know why Providence brought both of you here. Adrian's expression changed slightly. The priest noticed. So did I. And for the first time that night, I had the feeling that this story had started long before I ever opened those church doors. Sleep should have come easily. I had not rested properly in nearly 2 days. Yet long after Father Thomas left, and the church settled into silence, I remained awake in the small guest room beneath the sloped roof. Rain tapped softly against the window. The room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. A single lamp cast warm light across the blanket folded at the foot of the bed. Everything felt peaceful. That was the problem. Fear had become so familiar that peace felt suspicious. I sat near the window and watched droplets slide down the glass. Somewhere below, the church clock marked another hour. My thoughts drifted back to Adrian. To the way Father Thomas had looked at him. To the strange comment about Providence bringing us together. The more I thought about it, the less accidental this night seemed. Around 2 in the morning, I finally stepped into the hallway. The church was quiet. Shadows stretched across the wooden floor beneath small wall lamps. I moved carefully toward the staircase and stopped halfway down. A light still glowed beneath the door of the chapel. Curiosity pulled me forward. When I reached the doorway, I found Adrian sitting alone in the front pew. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. For the first time since meeting him, he looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper. Like a man carrying years he could not set down. He heard my footsteps and glanced back. You should be sleeping. I leaned lightly against the doorway. I could say the same thing. A faint smile touched his face before disappearing. Silence settled between us. Candlelight flickered near the altar. Colored reflections from the stained glass windows danced softly across the stone floor. Finally I walked inside and sat several feet away. Neither of us spoke for a while. The quiet felt different now. Less guarded. Father Thomas seemed to know you well, I said. Adrian looked toward the cross above the altar. He knew my mother better. Something in his voice made me wait instead of asking another question immediately. After several seconds he continued. She used to bring me here when I was young. I pictured a smaller version of the man beside me. The image felt impossible. Did you come often? Adrian nodded slowly. Every Sunday. The answer surprised me. Then what changed? His eyes lowered briefly. The candlelight reflected softly across his features. Life. There was no bitterness in the word. Only acceptance. After my mother died, I stopped coming. The confession hung quietly between us. I did not know what to say. Sometimes people needed understanding more than advice. Adrian exhaled slowly. This church was the last place she ever felt safe. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Suddenly I understood why he had been sitting alone beneath the cross when I arrived. Why he knew Father Thomas. Why the church mattered. We were both here for the same reason. Not because we were fearless. Because we were searching for safety. The realization settled gently inside me. Then Adrian looked toward me and said something that changed the entire night. Grace, if they discover where you are before sunrise, you and your sister will both need protection. My breath caught. My sister? Adrian nodded once. Which is why before morning comes we need a plan. The word protection echoed in my mind long after Adrian said it. Not because it sounded dramatic. Because nobody had offered it before. For 2 days every conversation had been filled with questions, warnings, and uncertainty. Adrian was the first person talking about solutions. Dawn was still hours away. Rain continued to whisper against the church windows while candlelight flickered softly through the chapel. I looked down at my hands and thought about my younger sister, Emma. She had no idea how serious any of this had become. I had intentionally hidden most of the truth from her. I told myself it was to protect her. In reality, I had been protecting myself from hearing fear in her voice. "She is staying with a friend tonight," I said. Adrian nodded. "Good. You keep saying she needs protection too." His expression remained serious. "Because people searching for leverage rarely stop with one person." The answer settled heavily in my chest. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Adrian stood and walked slowly toward one of the stained glass windows. Blue and gold reflections moved across the floor around him. "There is a secure property outside the city," he said. "Private. Quiet. Nobody would think to look there." I stared at him. "You are offering to hide us?" Adrian turned toward me. "I am offering you options." The distinction mattered. I could tell it mattered to him. He was not giving orders. He was placing a choice in front of me. Father Thomas had been right. There was something different about this man than the stories people told. The church clock chimed softly somewhere above us. Another hour gone. Another step closer to morning. "Why are you doing this?" I finally asked. Adrian looked away for a second before answering. "Because somebody should have done it for my mother." The honesty caught me completely off guard. He rarely said more than necessary. Yet this answer felt personal. Real. "What happened to her?" I asked carefully. Adrian's eyes moved toward the cross above the altar. "She spent most of her life believing she had to face everything alone." His voice remained calm, but I could hear something beneath it. Regret. By the time people offered help, she had already carried too much for too long. Silence followed. The chapel suddenly felt smaller. More intimate. Like two strangers had accidentally stepped beyond the walls they normally kept around themselves. I looked at him differently after that. Not as a powerful businessman. Not as the man whose name filled rumors and headlines. Just a son who still missed his mother. Then a vibration broke the silence. My phone. The sound seemed impossibly loud. My stomach immediately tightened. Emma's name appeared on the screen. Relief washed through me. I answered at once. "Emma? Grace?" Her voice sounded nervous. "There are two men asking questions in the neighborhood." Every muscle in my body went rigid. Adrian saw my expression instantly. "What happened?" he asked quietly. I listened as Emma explained. The men had not threatened anyone. They had not caused a scene. They were simply asking whether anyone had seen me recently. Looking. Searching. Getting closer. When the call ended, I lowered the phone slowly. The fear returned immediately. Not panic. Something sharper. More focused. Adrian understood before I spoke. He had already reached the same conclusion. The uncertainty he mentioned earlier was disappearing. The search was narrowing. Morning was coming. And suddenly we no longer had time to wait. The next hour passed faster than the previous 2 days combined. Fear had a strange way of accelerating time. One moment I was standing in the chapel holding my phone. The next, Father Thomas was helping gather a few necessities while Adrian spoke quietly with people I never saw and never heard directly. The church remained peaceful on the surface. Candles still glowed. Rain still tapped against the stained glass windows. Yet beneath that calm, everything was moving. Every decision suddenly mattered. Just before dawn, Father Thomas handed me a small canvas bag. "For the road," he said with a gentle smile. Inside were bottled water, snacks, and a worn pocket Bible. I started to protest. He raised a hand. "Humor an old priest." Despite everything, I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had managed in days. The church bells remained silent as Adrian and I stepped into the sanctuary one last time before leaving. The storm had weakened. Rain no longer pounded the city. Instead, it drifted softly across the windows like a curtain preparing to rise. The first traces of dawn colored the sky beyond the stained glass. Blue turning silver. Silver turning gold. Adrian stood near the altar, his hands resting loosely at his sides. The candlelight softened the sharp lines of his face. For a moment he looked less like a man surrounded by power and more like someone standing between his past and his future. "There is still time to refuse," he said. I looked at him. "Refuse what?" "My help." The answer surprised me. Not because he offered the choice. Because he genuinely meant it. Most powerful people use generosity like a contract. Adrian treated it like a door. One I could walk through or leave behind. I glanced around the church. The wooden pews. The flickering candles. The quiet sanctuary that had somehow become the safest place I had known in days. Then I thought about Emma. About the flash drive. About the people asking questions closer and closer to home. Finally I shook my head. "I am tired of running alone." Something softened in Adrian's expression. Not victory. Relief. As if that answer mattered more than he expected. We began walking toward the front doors. Halfway there I stopped. "Adrian?" He turned. "Yes?" I hesitated. "What happens when this is over?" Morning light spilled through the stained glass and painted colors across the floor between us. Adrian looked down at those colors for a moment before answering. "Then you get your life back." The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard. No promises. No conditions. No expectation. Just freedom. For reasons I could not fully explain, emotion tightened my throat. Nobody had spoken about my future in days. Everyone else focused on the problem. Adrian focused on what came after it. We reached the doors together. Beyond them, the city waited beneath a clearing sky. The rain was ending. The darkness was retreating. Father Thomas stood near the entrance watching quietly. His eyes moved from me to Adrian and back again. Then he smiled. "Some people arrive here looking for answers," he said softly. "Others arrive here so they can become one." I did not fully understand what he meant. Not yet. But as Adrian opened the heavy church doors and morning light flooded inside, I had the strange feeling that the most important part of this story was only beginning. 3 weeks later, I stood on the porch of a quiet house surrounded by tall trees and morning sunlight. The air smelled like pine and fresh grass instead of rain and traffic. Somewhere in the distance, birds moved through the branches. It felt impossible that this was still the same story. Impossible that only a few weeks earlier I had been running through Brooklyn with fear chasing every step. Emma stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to me. She looked happier than I had seen her in months. Safer. The difference showed in the way she smiled. In the way she slept through the night. In the way she talked about the future again. Some mornings I caught myself simply watching her laugh because I had almost forgotten what peace looked like. The flash drive was gone now. Not lost. Not hidden. Handled through channels far beyond anything I understood. Adrian never shared details. He only told me what mattered. The truth had reached the people who needed to see it. The burden was no longer mine to carry. For the first time since this began, I could breathe without waiting for something terrible to happen. A black sedan appeared at the end of the driveway just before noon. I recognized it immediately. Emma noticed too. "He is here." There was amusement in her voice. I smiled despite myself. Adrian stepped from the car a moment later. He looked exactly the same as the night I first saw him beneath the cross. Perfectly composed. Perfectly calm. Yet somehow different too. Less distant. Less guarded. Sunlight filtered through the trees as he approached. Emma excused herself with a grin that was far too knowing before disappearing back inside. Adrian watched her go. "She seems happy." "She is." His eyes returned to mine. "And you?" The question lingered between us. Weeks ago I would have answered with uncertainty. Fear. Exhaustion. Today was different. I looked around the property. The open sky. The quiet road. The future that no longer felt impossible. I think I finally remember what normal feels like. Something warm appeared in his expression. We walked slowly along a narrow path beside the trees. Neither of us spoke for a while. We did not need to. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. The kind that only exists when two people no longer feel the need to prove anything. Eventually we reached a small hill overlooking a lake shimmering beneath the afternoon sun. Adrian stopped there. Father Thomas called yesterday. I smiled. How is he? Concerned. About what? A rare smile touched his face. He believes I have spent too much time away from church. I laughed. The sound echoed softly across the water. Then I looked toward the horizon where sunlight danced across the lake. You know, I said quietly, I ran into that church because I thought I was out of options. Adrian stood beside me without speaking. I thought I was hiding from my life. The breeze moved gently through the trees. Turns out I was walking toward it. For a moment neither of us moved. The lake reflected the sky like polished glass. Somewhere above us, clouds drifted across endless blue. Then Adrian nodded once. Not because he needed to agree. Because he understood. And standing there beneath the afternoon sun, I finally understood something too. Safety was never the church. Safety was never the house. Safety was never even the plan that saved us. It was the moment someone looked at your fear and chose not to walk away. I entered that church searching for a place to hide. I walked out having found something far more powerful. Hope had a face. And his name was Adrian Blackwell.